So I'm really happy to have everyone here. And before we get into the topic of practice, I'm going to ask the folks here to introduce themselves a little bit more. Do you want to lead us off, Liz?
Sure. Thank you so much, Aubrey. So I'm Liz Carlisle. I teach at the UC Santa Barbara. I teach agroecology classes in an undergraduate environmental studies program. But more deeply, who I am and why I'm here, kind of following on the session we had this morning. My grandmother was a really important person in my life. She grew up on a family farm in western Nebraska. And it always seemed to me she had a very deep connection to land, and that was something that I really wanted for myself. She also lost that family farm in the Dust Bowl and was really honest with me about how hard that was to lose that connection to land and community and, of course, livelihood in that process. And so I think she kind of planted a seed in me for wanting to be part of some kind of healing on land. And in my life, I think the layers of trying to understand what that looks like there are many of them. Understanding what it means to come from a settler colonial background. Why was my grandmother's family in this land that they didn't really understand very well in the first place? Her father getting really bad instructions from USDA to overplow that land. And so what does healing really look like in a deep way? Not just for me to recover a land connection, but for me somehow to come into connection with land and community in a good way that is healing and that I can give back to something larger rather than replicating those extractive histories. So that's what brings me here.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning still, sorry. My name is Hector Calderon Victoria. I'm a farmer and a organizer with the National Young Farmers Coalition in California. And I'm also a product of my ancestors. I'm an immigrant. I'm also an advocate. I'm a community member of my community in California. And I'm also love cooking, so these are all things that really do connect me back to food. But I also think that for me, hearing the stories of my great-grandfather, who was a farmer back in Guerrero, which is in Mexico, really make me think about me reconnecting to something that has really allowed me to feel a lot of honor, because no one in my immediate family had ever been in agriculture besides my great-grandfather on my mom's side. And so just this reconnection for me has brought me back to being connected to the land, feeling that there is something way beyond me that I still don't really fully understand, but I feel connected to it. And so I think that for me, that's sort of the reason that I've gotten into farming and feeling that it has allowed me to reconnect to my roots back in Mexico and also with the land in itself where I reside and do farming in California. And so that's just a little bit about myself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Bowles. I'm an agroecologist at UC Berkeley, where I teach agroecology courses and have the privilege of working with an amazing group of undergraduate, graduate students, postdocs, and learning a lot from them and from the farmers and community-based organizations and others that we work with. Yeah. Oh, sorry, that's probably better. So a little bit about why I'm here. When I was in college, I loved science, and I was also working as an organizer on a living wage campaign, and began to feel a real disconnect between the work that I was doing in that organizing role and the type of science that I had been working on, and found an urban farm in Nashville where I was living. And also started reading a lot of fellow Kentuckians, people with very different identities, like Bell Hooks and Wendell Berry, but who had a common, somewhat common sort of vision of an agrarian ethic as a means for kind of working towards a better future. And so from there, that led me to agroecology as a way that felt like I could intertwine some of this interest in science and being a researcher that I felt with really being connected with the world. So that's a little bit about me.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. I'm Ernesto. You've heard a little bit about me, so I'm trying to think about what to share. Maybe in terms of personal history, I was born and raised in El Salvador, in San Salvador, so not in the rural areas, and came here when I was 19 to the United States, and have been back and forth Central America for a while until I finally landed in Vermont, and I've been there for 17 years. And it's very different than El Salvador. I never planned to be an academic in terms of an aspiration, but I like it and ended up being that. And I think for me, research and teaching have always had an action orientation. So even though I know that sometimes it's good to have curiosity and do knowledge for knowledge's sake, I really found in agroecology a way to work with people to try to find solutions or responses to questions that they might have and that I might have and that we could answer together. But always trying to think about how is this going to be useful to the farmers and the people that I work with. And I worked a lot with coffee farmers in my native El Salvador and Central America and Mexico using participatory action research. We had a really good network with Steve Gleesman and his group. He had a group of coffee people for a while, UC Santa Cruz, that we networked and learned a lot from each other. And now I'm in a different phase. I did all this very community-embedded work for years and love it, but it seems that now I'm being called to play different roles. They're not necessarily more fun, but it seems like we have to do it, right? We have to take it on if we're giving the opportunity. So now I'm in more of this leadership role at the University of Vermont in the Institute, probably the first person of color to lead anything like that at that university. And I'm really excited to keep working with everybody here to push the needle in the US, because it's not something that I've been doing very much. I've always looked outward and going back to my communities in Latin America and through some collaborations also parts of Africa. But now I'm excited about this, and I'm really happy to be here and sharing with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good people. I am so honored to be in this room, and I will just begin by saying my heart is so full and my mind is so full from yesterday. It was like a 70-hour day somehow, and I met like so many people and had so many conversations, and so I don't even know what day it is, but I'm really honored, and I love the evolution of this whole gathering. It feels really authentic and honest and brave and good that we're just, centering the beautiful and powerful response and critiques that have emerged yesterday and today. So I'm Garrett, and I have a deep love of land that is born of Kentucky and the gorgeous hills of Kentucky. Where's Mariel? We're doing work there. My love of land and land-based life comes from a traumatic space of being the descendant of colonial settler enslavers. So the work of the whiteness and extricating this love of land, extricating whiteness from this land-based agrarian kind of vision is my work on a personal level, as well as on the policy end, where I do work in DC, Piscataway Nation territory, and think about how the Department of Agriculture, which is such an imperial force. So my work is on researching and teaching the international and domestic racism and geopolitical empire of the Farm Bill and policy. And yet there are fascinating, important histories about the Farm Bill that are about honest recognitions of the ecological and economic destructions of capitalism unfettered. So that is something that I'm excited to think about with you all, and how that precedent could be used for an Indigenous and Black-led agroecology movement moving forward.
I'll let you all keep the mic over there so you can pass it. So what I'm going to do is just ask one opening question, and we'll see who feels really compelled to respond first. And then I'd like to be able to hear questions from other people, and I can popcorn around, or love to be able to have the panelists respond to each other as well. So just to kick us off, we've heard a lot this morning about why we've come here. And I think it would be really wonderful to hear about how, for each of you, your why translates into how you do your work, how your work embodies your values, and how you work to co-create knowledge. Maybe you could share a particular experience or story around something that has been exciting or challenging for you in terms of co-creation.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I think that's really important, how our why translates into our how, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that. I feel like I still have a lot of growth, hopefully yet to come, actually thanks to the many ways in which people in this room are helping me to develop and grow into a more deeply grounded how. So similar maybe to folks who've spoken before, I look around and I see so many of my mentors and teachers and incredibly helpful peers in this room. So thank you for helping me continue to grow into a deeper how. So the two primary forms of my work are in teaching and in storytelling, and both of those need to be deeply collaborative in various ways. I do a lot of community engaged teaching. My students really want to go out and see agroecology in practice, and so that means trying to develop reciprocal relationships with those practitioners who are so generously sharing their knowledge, and that is challenging in the context of academic institutions that don't always recognize that knowledge as legitimate or have budgets already set up for those folks to be adequately compensated or to facilitate long-term relationships. So I'm still fairly new in the place where I live. This is just my 4th year at UC Santa Barbara. So a really big focus has been building those long-term partnerships, coming to community partners and saying, you know, this is why I'm coming. I would like to offer educational experiences to these undergraduates. This is what I have to offer in terms of financial resources or potential institutional connections or letters of support for your grants, some of the things I can brainstorm that might be useful in establishing a reciprocal relationship. This is what I acknowledge that I'm asking of your time and your knowledge. And then to ask, you know, what are your goals, and how can I help you meet them? And is there a way that we can work together that would be equitable and that can last and that can sustain, where we actually help each other build towards each other's goals? So on the teaching side, that's something that I'm really, really deeply engaged in, like at the moment. And then storytelling, I think, can be extremely fraught. I most recently wrote a book that centers the stories of 4 women of color who are leaders in what I'm calling, for the purposes of the book, regenerative agriculture, because I'm interested in shaping the discourse around what regeneration really means. And that is an incredibly fraught thing to do as a white academic. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, for representational violence in my making that choice to write such a book. So the process of thinking about how that can be reciprocal is ongoing for me. There were some kind of basic things at the beginning about compensating people for all of their time, doing interviews, reviewing drafts to make sure that things were accurate and representations felt good. Things like deflecting certain kinds of speaking invitations or media invitations based on what kinds of things folks featured in the book wanted to do themselves. But there's a lot of ongoing work because the benefits will continue to accrue for me. And so I need to continue to think about how to make sure that any good or any resources that are gathered as a result are continually being rematriated not only back to the individuals that are featured in this book, because their individual stories are very inspiring and I think help students who read this book to kind of see themselves, but all of those people also come from communities and are organizers themselves and really want to see resources come back to those communities that they come from. So that's a lifetime responsibility for me in order to be ethical and have integrity and sort of holding story, is to think about how I'm continually bringing resources back through whatever I get access to.
I'll share a short one. I think the challenge as an academic, as a researcher, who I think we end up being this because we'd like to use our mind a lot, and the mind can go fast in a lot of different directions and get excited. And then when you work with a practitioner who's dealing with very on the ground, grounded issues, then you're up there with your head and they're down here with their hands and dealing with crops and soil. So a bit of a funny story, we work with this vegetable farmer in Vermont, Hillary Martin. She's great. She has a good sense of humor too. And we've had this partnership with them for a long time where they support our agroecology class. They're one of the labs of the class. The students go to that class out semester and do a lot of different things. But I've been stubborn, kind of necio, wanting to do participatory action research with them. And for them, they have this commitment to supporting education. So the challenge, I think, because you asked for a challenge, is to stop myself and pay attention and listen, because I kept asking her, like, so Hillary, what do you think about doing this experiment here on your farm? And she always listens really nicely, and she's like, that's interesting. And then she'll say, useful? I don't know. And so there's this, and I keep, I bring something else up and kind of like the similar response. And I think the paying attention and listening to the people that we work, and this goes also for farmers and activists, right? When you talk to a researcher, paying attention and listening to them is a good practice, because I can come up with like 5 different experiments really quickly. And all of them are probably not useful at all to the farmer. So we really need to practice that listening. And that's how I think we can do work that is useful to people, and that many times also contributes to that intellectual piece that we like to work on, because if not, we wouldn't be where we are, right? So that co-creation is really the important one, and it can take time. And that happened with Hillary, because at some point she came back and she said, you were talking about this thing one time, and what about this, right? And then but it didn't happen right away, and it took some thinking, some reflecting, maybe some observing on her part. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ernesto. That reminded me of something, a question that I read recently that has really, really stuck with me, and it was from an activist, Benjamin McBride, and he says, the wrong first question is, what do we need to do? And the right first question is, who do we need to become? And I think when we think about the co-creation of knowledge, at the heart of it are relationships. And starting with some internal work, I think, is really critical. So what work internally do we need to do to support the types of transformative relationships that might actually lead to co-creation of knowledge? And there's a book, The 4 Pivots, Reimagining Ourselves, Reimagining Justice, by Sean Jenright. I don't know if anybody's heard of it before, but the first pivot in this book is is about moving from lens to mirror, right? And so many of us, as academics in particular, and also more broadly, I think than that, are trained with a lens, right? We look at social problems, we analyze situations, we look at external structures that, say, help keep lock-ins of industrial agriculture in place. But and that's all necessary, but we also need a mirror. And of course, this is often part of reflexive research, right, in terms of examining our biases and assumptions and our positionality and how it influences what we do and how we interact with others. But I think this idea of a mirror also maybe needs to go deeper and begin to confront our egos. When we lead with ego, I don't think we're gonna be able to form the types of transformative relationships that we need. And maybe I'm speaking in particular to the academics in the room here, because I think academia cultivates and nurtures egos, right? I mean, our institutions reward us for being the superstars, for being the leaders, right? And so many of our metrics are about what we achieve and our, right? So what would it look like if we dismantled our egos, right? How would we approach our relationships differently? Could it lead to a culture of service in research rather than what we're often pushed to do, at least from our institutions, which is a culture of leadership and being at the forefront? But I think Jen Wright points out that our culture of our organizations is really not conducive to a lot of self-reflection often, that this type of mirror work is not a quick fix, it's hard and ongoing. Talk to any Buddhist and finding emptiness and the not self is truly a lifelong project towards enlightenment. So this is not an easy thing, right? But that social change, I think, is so deeply connected to our own capacity for reflection and healing. So I think maybe it's a little contradictory in the sense that when I think about how we start with co-creation of knowledge, I do think about I start with me and what are the internal work that I need to do and keep doing all the time, and that will be a lifelong project, not a state that I get to at some point.
I think for me, I don't come from a research institution, and so I think for a lot of the connections that I've been making with BIPOC producers is really formulating trustful relationships with a lot of them. And that means really just listening to their needs outside of even farming. Like some of them are dealing with housing issues, food insecurity, and also I think a lot of the work that I've been involved in, even though I think we connect on a very deeper level because I am a farmer and they're a farmer, we're able to just talk about the challenges that we're both having around our crops, around the resources that we're having in terms of state to federal programs, and then also just the daily grind of doing the work that we both are sort of like really involved in our hands in the ground. And so that has been the way that I've been able to formulate a lot of my relationships with, and being able to also honestly just go outside of what is farming. What are your needs that are happening at the moment? Things that are going on. A lot of folks that I've been working with in the Central Coast are also dealing with being undocumented, right? And so the sphere of how do I apply to certain programs and being able to do that research with them and honestly just being able to look at things from a very different perspective. So I think that with all of that said, it's another portion that I could say is political education, being able to provide that and giving them the confidence with, I think, with being able to hold them with the idea that they have a story to tell, along with all of this confidence that's been built with them. And so allowing them to just feel prepared, confident enough to feel that they can speak on behalf of their lived experiences that they're going through, all of the challenges and also the victories that they've had, right? A lot of the folks that I have been working with, at least on the Central Coast, have been farm workers who have now become farmers themselves, even though I don't differentiate the two from either one, right? So I think that that's something that I've sort of been able to do with farmers and be able to build those connections. And a lot of them don't think of themselves as agroecologists, right? And I think that that's the other thing, although they are practicing it in many ways. And so, yeah, I think that's all I really have to offer.
Thank you. So I'll introduce a project that I've been working on that really the audience would be the farmers Hector's working with. You know, really kind of thinking about this next generation of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, immigrant, young farmers who would love to grow nourishing food and steward the land and water if, like, we as a society let them. It's such a societal fail to not let all the young people who want to farm for a living farm. And so I think the project that we're working on is saying that this hustle for funding from USDA programs and the pennies and the crumbs that come from the miscellaneous title. There's some good programs, that come from the miscellaneous title, photo and lamp, and they're tiny little kind of super compromised and problematic, little victories. But the larger thing is that the whole Farm Bill was built as a mechanism to secure livelihood for white male farmers. Like the whole thing, it was never a free market. Like from the 20s to the 30s to the 40s to the 50s, I know because my people were farmers who benefited from the US program, tobacco. So I know very acutely that Kentucky stayed agrarian and had small land acreage land holdings because there was a rock solid price floor and a quota system afforded to all of these farmers, largely white men, but actually a whole Black farming community in Kentucky and elsewhere around these programs, and working with the federations and the cooperatives of excavating this history of Black farmers using those commodity programs to stave off racist purchasing and actually stay on the land with some portion of their land in a crop and then the rest of it a beautiful garden for food sovereignty and for feeding their people, and feeding communities. So this irony that the Farm Bill actually was a mechanism to keep small and mid-sized farmers on the land for white men, why can't we kind of reclaim that history for the farmers Hector's working with, as they kind of forge, obviously land back needs to be there and land distribution and, health insurance and debt cancellation, but the guarantee of a price floor, there is a 60-year precedent for that. So the Disparity to Parity project is just kind of thinking through that history, how problematic it was in terms of it was a racist exclusion of tenant farming, and yet what a powerful and interesting precedent it was, and what an important kind of reference point for us as we make demands to the USDA to guarantee another set of price floors, not just for commodity, monocultural, but for agroecological production, not just for white farmers, but for the whole new generation of farmers that are ready to do the work of nourishing their communities, but just need a livelihood.
Thank you. I'm on my feet. I'm standing up so I can bring the mic to you. I'd love to welcome questions or responses or things that you'd like to hear more about or things that you'd like to share in this conversation about practice.
Well, maybe I'll say a little bit about your second question. I don't feel like I'm the right. And I would also invite. I think we could also open. I don't want this to be one directional with questions and us answering those questions. I think there's so much experience in this room that these questions can be for the audience too. But I'll say a little bit on your second question, which I think was all this focus on climate right now, and are there maybe some unanticipated or dangerous consequences of that. the history of the productivist kind of approach to agriculture that's manifested in the Green Revolution was about one goal, right? It had one, at least one proximate goal in mind around increasing production at all costs. And so anytime we have one goal in mind, I think it's gonna lead to outcomes that are not good. And so this focus on agriculture as a climate change mitigation, a land sink for carbon, while there may be some opportunity there, and there may be a lot of farmers who are already doing that, already sequestering carbon in various places, I think as a policy tool to really, if that's our singular goal, it's not going to lead to good outcomes for a lot of folks. And I think we see this particularly acutely in the conversations around the formation of carbon markets and who's going to get left out of those. I think it's pretty obvious that it's going to favor very large-scale producers. And so, now in terms of potential opportunity, and this is fraught, but I mean, is this a sort of a Trojan horse for showing the value of agroecological systems that do already, that clearly contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation? But I think I think that it's quite fraught. I think this this national and global sort of policy focus on agriculture as a tool for mitigating climate change. Yeah. But that didn't get at your first question at all. So pass it on to others.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Carolina from Rafi USA, and wanted to touch like a point that was talked here. I know that we need to go through our ethic reflection about how we fund as a movement of agroecology, and I respect that and I agree. I am just, but I do think that for policy, we should be ready because farmers are ready, and they are they're waiting for policies that actually supports them, as there are a lot of other policies and programs who are supporting the same farmers as you mentioned in the history of USDA. So like a policy specifically for agroecology, should we be supporting in terms of constructing with USDA or not? I think in some point we should be, because I don't see how it is possible for agroecological farmers to be sustainable in a country that is based in subsidies, and they don't receive any type of subsidy because they are already doing what it is to be done. So yeah, just wanted to point out here that I do think we have to talk about funding and what should we fund, but we would need to get to a point where this is policy based. Yes.
Hi, Garrett, I'm so intrigued by reclaiming the policy, the livelihood policy, and I know there's a lot of organizations in the room that are working on that. And one thing that I always find interesting about also the history of the farm policy is Jess Gilbert has that work on planning democracy, right? And how it was really exciting. They were going to have county committees that were going to help localize this modern state, and that ended up being really bad in the particularly in the South, right? And led to a lot of discrimination. So I guess my question is, obviously all of these institutions are inherently flawed in so many ways, but there's glimmers of possibility. How do we change that? Can we? And how do we protect against these really good kinds of things going wrong, right? I don't know.
So it's a great question, and I will say particularly as like a white academic, I'm not going to solve it, the presumption of but I'll say the history is so interesting because when you go into the archives, and the part that I think I want to pass on to folks to kind of seed and plant in their minds and in the movements is that there was actually an anti-corporate instinct there. And there was an idea that farmers have to be the price setters collectively. The buyers can't be the price setters. They are the price takers. And the price is set by the cooperatives of the farmers. And that's such a powerful principle and not an aberration. Like if you knew a farmer in the 20th century, it's because they're part of that policy. Like the whole thing is built on that. And so I feel like recovering the anti-corporate, anti-capitalist. It wasn't called anti-capitalist, but if you read it, it was railing against the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression as kind of war militarism capitalism. It's all born of World War I and the imperial force of the US, and a realization that that was going to undermine life itself. Like 1.2 billion, tons of topsoil landed on the desk of FDR, and then that began the Farm Bill, So there was such an honest recognition of capitalism unfettered will kill us all economically. And the Great Depression began as a farm crisis and exploded to the world. So I feel like recovering the anti-corporate farmers collectively and cooperatively as the price setters for the value of their work is the part that's interesting. When you get into the county committees and the farm, the ag extension, it gets very colonialist very quick. So there's lots to let go of.
Thank you all. I'm Chris Murakami. I'm a faculty member at Chatham University in a food studies program. I appreciate this conversation from a kind of practitioner focused. And a lot of you all mentioned this kind of process of building trust. And I think it's one of the tensions that's been brought up in terms of what's happening in the room right now. And not to put you all on the spot, but I'm putting you all on the spot. What are some entry points to building trust for this group, for the space that we're in right now? And yeah, kind of leveraging a lot of the work that you all are doing. I see you as like kind of bridge builder in bridge building spaces or kind of border crossing spaces where you're figuring out how to navigate between different organizations, kind of being and also forming relationships with frontline practitioners. But what does trust building look like for us in this moment, and then offer others to share their ideas about what that looks like too?
Maybe we can turn it around. I'd like to ask your question to the audience.
All right, I'll break the ice, guys. One thing that really stands out to me is the power in, I think a lot of us in here can understand the power in research, the power in history, and the power in language throughout all of those. And one thing that stands out to me in particular about building trust is that it's not about in the instance when you see someone, it's like, ooh, let me trust you, you trust me. It's like, it's not like something that can happen just in an instant. You know what I'm saying? Like, we all understand that it's a longer term. And I think someone said yesterday, like 500-year relationships. So if you wanted to be in relation with someone for 500 years, meaning you want your grandkids, kids to be friends with or in love with or in community, beloved community with someone else's kids, what are the things that we can do today, right now, right? And so I don't think it's prescriptive or like it's, you know what I'm saying? Like this is box A, this is box B. I think it's like, where are the opportunities for strategic relationship building, right? Or like, and a question that I was gonna ask, but I think you kind of touched on it, and I think I opened it up to everyone too, since this was kind of a stickler, is what are some adjacent movements to this agroecology movement that are undeniable, right? Like, there are certain things that we can't talk about one thing without talking about something else. And so my question is, what are those something else's, and how can we be intentional in the way that we show up in those other spaces or bring those other concerns into our work as agroecologists so that it's you know, the work is authentic to what we're doing, right? And it's integrative, and it is still like not prioritizing one need over the other, but identifying these similarities in these movements where we can all cohesively, because the reality is, we were talking about at our table, like, there are people who get paid to lobby against the things that we care about all day, every single day. And it's not just what we care about, it's what farmers care about, it's what consumers care about, it's what single mothers, single fathers, single parents, like, these are things that everybody really cares about. So the question is, how do we find the people that care about what we care about and engage them authentically as we move forward to bring about whatever world we're talking about? And I think dialogue plays a huge role in that. But I just wanted to open that up. Like, what are some other sectors that are, you know, undeniable as we sit here eating these beautiful breakfasts, but the world is definitely on fire outside. So it's not a shortage of issues, but what is your issue? Like, what is your why that brings you to this space? And I really appreciate you all incorporating that in this morning. But I just went a lot of places, opened it up for a lot of responses. So whatever you felt, feel free to respond, room.
You want us to trust you. How can I trust you when you have no spirituality that's a pillar of what we're doing? How can I trust you if you don't give recognition that we are animals that live on this planet with many other types of animals that feed us, that take care of us, that help us, and plants that are also related to us? How can I trust you when you don't pray before a meal to thank those plants for sacrificing themselves to feed us and for giving us the bounty of this table? How can I trust you when you don't pray before the meeting starts to ask that everyone be encouraged and feel comfortable enough to open their hearts and speak their minds with that heart in their place that comes out on those words that come out of their mouth? How can I trust you to listen to what I have to say, to really hear me and see me for the human I am, rather than the American Indian woman who has survived to my age? You want trust? We want you to recognize there are certain things that our culture has taught us that we are expecting to have in our place. So when we go to get into the line to eat, we say a silent prayer for everyone. When we come into this meeting in the morning, we say a silent prayer that everyone has and encourages them to have an understanding. It was really interesting to see the young lady last night talk about her feelings. And we all looked at each other and we said, wow, you know, we just feel normal as ever because we're used to having this happen to us all the time. You know, nobody really gave a damn about our feelings or cared, but we stuck with it and we got tougher and tougher, and we're dealing with hard, real questions here. And we stayed with you even though that spirituality didn't seem to be in here at all. And I think that that, for us, is a real part of the trust. You want our trust? We expect you to take enough time to understand that, number one, we are all animals together, and number two, that the most important thing that pulls us all together as those human animals is our spirituality and our respect for the earth. Because we are talking about what we get from the earth, what we understand from that earth, all of those things. So I don't trust any of you in this room other than my relatives that are close to me, because they know what that prayer is. They know how critically important this planet is to us. It is our mother. It is the most important thing because our mother has the power to wipe our species out if she feels that we are not learning or doing or respecting each other. And when I say each other, I don't mean just humans. So as you move forward in agroecology, you must think about respect. You must think about spirituality. Because if you're going to be talking to communities of color, if you're going to be talking to those communities who have a deep, rich, long, generational relationship with the planet and those things around them, you have to recognize that spirituality. I've got more to say, but that's what I'm going to say for now.